The Cleveland Browns don't have any needs other than wide receiver on offense, period. That's it. I don't have to say anything else because I don't think they're moving on from Baker Mayfield. The only way they would do that is through a trade, and I don't see that coming, at least yet. So wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver. Jarvis Landry's going to be gone, in my opinion. Rashard Higgins could be back. I think Donovan Peoples-Jones will be in the mix, but other than that, they need another receiver. So I wouldn't be surprised if they targeted Chris Godwin, if they targeted Allen Robinson, if they targeted one of these top names at wide receiver, obviously outside of Odell Beckham Jr., that is not happening. So, the wide receiver position. Offensive line, straight across the board, is all back. David Njoku is a free agent, but I don't think you should really be spending big money on him because you still have Austin Hooper and Harrison Bryant. So bringing him back would be a luxury and not a need. So the way that I look at Cleveland is spend the money that you would have spent on Njoku on a wide receiver. And I think Chris Godwin would be a great fit for them. I also feel like, who else? Somebody like in the inside that's tough. But Robinson's not a bad fit for really any team. But I think specifically Chris Godwin, kind of to just upgrade that Jarvis Landry role, would probably be the way that I go. You could also look to the draft, obviously. Mike Williams, I don't think fits necessarily that well here. AB's not going to work here. Juju would actually not be a bad value signing to take over for Jarvis Landry. If you want to add some speed, maybe DJ Chark or Will Fuller, they could look that way. Or if they want to go veteran, T.Y. Hilton, or who else? Emmanuel Sanders as a third, Jamison Crowder. Because the Browns are in a funky place, right? They were a much better roster than their record indicated. So they're not that far away. They just need to add a wide receiver in free agency, maybe in the draft as well, and then upgrade the defense. Now we move to the defense. Myles Garrett's there, obviously. Malik McDowell was huge for them last year, and he's back. At least he's currently signed, I believe. They've got okay depth. I think they could really upgrade the interior defensive line depth. Specifically get maybe a big body in there to take on the run game. I do feel like last year they got moved around a little bit in the run game on the D-line and the inside. But the edge, I think you're looking to bring back Jadeveon Clowney for sure to pair with Myles Garrett. And then behind Jadeveon Clowney, you always got to be aware that he has injury concerns. So bringing in more depth behind that. And there's lots of players that can fit this system. One that I'm thinking of off the top of my head is Jerry Hughes from the Bills. I think would be a nice add as a depth player. They could look at somebody like Derek Barnett, Justin Houston, Nwosu from the Chargers. Maybe, I don't think McKinley would come back. I wouldn't be surprised if the Browns, it would be a classic Brown signing if they sign like Dante Fowler to a 1-year contract. That would be like this year's Takk McKinley, so to speak. And then on the interior defensive line, they could use a difference maker there. They don't really have one. I mean, McDowell was solid. They could use a difference maker, like a Calais Campbell, but there's not a lot of guys out there. DJ Jones, I think, fits this system well. They could look, if they want a bigger body, Sebastian Joseph Day or Harrison Phillips as a run defender, but they kind of like those pass rusher types. So guys like Maurice Hurst, like I said already, DJ Jones, maybe BJ Hill. Those guys would make sense for the Browns. Linebacker, I would re-sign Anthony Walker, in my opinion, if you could, for a cheap 1 to 2 year contract, because I thought he was solid. You've got JOK at that position, who is really good. And you've got some other younger guys like Jacob Phillips, Wilson. Those guys are kind of like depth players. Corner position, you addressed last offseason, so you don't really have to address it this offseason, but you might address safety. So this is a team that could use, I think, speed at safety. I think their safety speed is lacking, but they're kind of that team that's a little bit Seattle scheme based. So they do kind of traditionally like that free safety and strong safety because they play a lot of cover 3. So their strong safety has to be involved in the run game more so. But I do think they could upgrade speed because I don't think Johnson is a very fast player. But I could see them trying to target like Whitehead, Curse, Kareem Jackson. I could see them targeting, who else? Jabril Peppers. They traded away Jaquiski Tart, Tracy Walker. Again, the same guys sort of the Jets, same mold, just to complement Johnson. Or they could try to add a free safety and make Johnson kind of more of the strong in-box safety. In that case, you might try to steal Jesse Bates away, but that would probably be pretty pricey. Marcus Williams would definitely be a fit there. Marcus May would be a fit. Quandre Diggs would be a fit. I don't think Devin McCourty would come, but you could try. Anthony Harris actually I think makes a lot of sense for this defense. I wouldn't be surprised if they signed him. So safety, I would definitely look towards, maybe making Johnson more of that in-box player and maybe try to sign a faster guy for the back end. Might not be a bad idea if you're the Browns, but really, you're looking mostly to spend on the defense, and then offensively, just adding wide receiver would be nice for Cleveland. The Cincinnati Bengals. The Cincinnati Bengals. Jake with the super chat, or the super sticker, I should say. Thank you once again. Jake, you're the man. Appreciate it for the super sticker. The Cincinnati Bengals. So we got the Cincinnati Bengals up next. The team that went to the Super Bowl. One thing that you don't need is quarterback. Another thing you don't need is wide receiver. So you're good there. What do you need? You need offensive line. That's what you need, Bengals fans, and you know it. Jonah Williams is there. He's solid, but everybody else could probably use an improvement. From guard to center to the opposite tackle position. I don't think having Riley Reif back would actually be all that bad. I thought when, if they could have had him in there at the end of the season, I think it would have improved the tackle immensely just to solidify it a little bit more. And then really, if you could get Riley Reif back as that transition guy, maybe you draft the younger tackle in the middle rounds to take over for him a year from now or 2 years from now. But I think you could bring back Riley Reif, have Jonah Williams on the left side, Riley Reif on the right side, and then spend your money in the middle of the offensive line. I think that would immensely help Joe Burrow, because I think Joe Burrow is one of those guys kind of like Tom Brady where he likes to step up and maneuver the pocket. He doesn't necessarily like to get outside the pocket. So really it's important for those type of players to have solid interior pass protection. So when you look at the Bengals, the guard position, the center position is where you target. So guard, you've got Brandon Scherf, Lincoln Tomlinson, Connor Williams, James Daniels, Austin Corbett, Andrew Norwell, Alex Kappa, Mark Glowinski, Ted Karras. All of these guys could be on their way to Cincinnati, and I wouldn't be surprised. Brandon Scherf would be the ultimate scheme fit to me. Tomlinson, same thing, would work really well. I think James Daniels would also be nice. Any of those guys, if they could get one of those guys, that would be a huge home run. I think Andrew Norwell might be a little bit less pricey. That would be a nice addition. They run more so zone scheme stuff in the run game, so more so the zone blocking guys are the way to go, but they're not as zone reliant as teams like, let's say, the Rams. So center, you've got Ben Jones or Ryan Jensen. This is a team that could afford to go a little bit older with some of their acquisitions because they're in that window for the Super Bowl. So getting a Ryan Jensen or a Ben Jones would be awesome. I also feel like even a Matt Paredes or a Brian Allen wouldn't be bad either. And I'd specifically look at the guys that have played for the Rams. So Brian Allen, Austin Blythe, and who else? Who's the guard? Austin Corbett. All of those guys make sense for the Bengals because of how similar Zach Taylor and Sean McVay are and how much they kind of feed off of each other. And when we watched the Super Bowl, it was almost like the same team was playing each other. So you could see the Bengals stealing from the Rams and former Ram players to help their offensive line, especially if it would help the continuity of the offensive line. That would be a massive plus. The defense. So the offense, it's really offensive line, guys. CJ Uzomah is the tight end. He should be back unless they get Gronk. Other than that, I think they're just going to keep CJ Uzomah. As I've said for basically every team that needs a tight end, I wouldn't be surprised at all if another team, Zach Taylor, went out and targeted a Robert Tonyan or somebody like that. I brought up Robert Tonyan a ton, but I feel like that would make sense. But I also look at the Bengals, and I feel like they're a team that does use their tight end more so as a receiver. So I wouldn't be shocked if they targeted Zach Ertz or Evan Ingram even, if CJ Uzomah goes elsewhere just for some reason. I don't know. But I thought he was a nice tight end for them. I think they'd like to keep him. But this is a team that doesn't necessarily need their tight end to be a big-time blocker. So I feel like somebody like Zach Ertz or, who did I bring up? Evan Ingram wouldn't also be shocking if they signed those guys. And then defensively, DJ Reader is still there. Trey Hendrickson is signed. Sam Hubbard is signed. So you got 3 of the 4 starting guys. Ogunjobi is a free agent. BJ Hill is a free agent. So you've got to sign one of those guys. If it was up to me, I'd try to re-sign BJ Hill tomorrow. And then I'd look to add layers of depth behind that, specifically at edge. I would like for them to have more flexibility at the edge position to rotate Hubbard and rotate Hendrickson if they could. That would be my personal preference. So adding like a veteran, like let's just throw out Justin Houston, like somebody like that, Jason Pierre-Paul, like the older guy, but can still play maybe better in a rotation nowadays than he is a starter. But add that type of presence to the Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson combination, and you're working with something there. And maybe with the amount of hybrid stuff that you do up front, somebody like JPP might not be a bad addition to this defense. Bengals do have a decent amount of money too, so they might be able to dish out some money for potentially somebody pretty interesting. But you've already re-signed, if you re-signed Sam Hubbard to a decent contract, you have Hendrickson on decent money, you have Reed on decent money. So it's more so about adding depth up front than anything else, and probably re-signing BJ Hill. I would honestly just let Ogunjobi walk. The linebacker position could add somebody. Logan Wilson was absolutely unbelievable this year. I think you've got one of your starters. I think it would be nice to add a second linebacker there. Somebody just solid that could contribute. Just a low-end free agent. Secondary, Von Bell. Obviously, your number one priority is getting Jesse Bates back. I think they will. You've got Awuzie, Mike Hilton. I believe Trey Waynes, who was hurt last year, is back as well, but they maybe could move on from him in free agency. So Von Bell and Jesse Bates, obviously getting Jesse Bates back is huge priority. I thought Ricardo Allen was actually decent for them as a third safety, so maybe you'd like to re-sign him as well. But Mike Hilton's your nickel. Awuzie is one of your corners. It's about that other side that you're looking for. So corners in free agency and they have enough money to really target whoever they kind of want to target, to be honest with you. So they could go out there, and I was very, very, very pleasantly surprised by their secondary play last year. But I think getting somebody that could play man and zone, equally well would be very nice. Bengals should really consider somebody like Stephon Gilmore. J.C. Jackson might be a little bit too much money at this point. If they could get Carlton Davis, that would be amazing. Stephon Gilmore would be amazing. Even Ward, I'd probably stay away from the Patrick Petersons. I don't think Joe Hayden really does well enough in man. He's more so his own guy. Maybe you take a flyer on Jason Verrett. Who else? But yeah, I think they should really try to target like a Gilmore or a Davis. I would be trying to go all in for those type of guys, because if you get that one more like number one corner type, that would be a game changer. That would definitely be a game changer for this defense. If you had that secondary with Awuzie on one side, Hilton in the nickel, let's say Gilmore on the other side, and then you got Bates and Bell, that would be pretty cool. So I would look to get a big-time corner if I could this free agency. add to the depth of the D-line and the offensive line. And I think they have enough money to do that. Honestly, they do. So the Bengals are obviously a contender, but I think a lot of their relevance next year is going to hinge on understanding one very important thing. So a lot of times teams that go to the Super Bowl or go far in the playoffs just feel like they've got to re-sign everybody and run it back. Usually when you run it back, you get worse because things don't replicate year to year in the NFL. Players regress, players get hurt, things happen. Other teams get better. So for the Bengals, the number one thing they've got to understand is don't count on bringing everyone back for it to just replicate. You've got to get better. You've got to feel like at the end of the day, in training camp, your roster is better than it was last year. That is the number one thing I would say to the Bengals. All right. The Pittsburgh Steelers. Okay. The Pittsburgh Steelers are at a crossroads now because the Pittsburgh Steelers no longer have Ben Roethlisberger. So one of their priority needs this offseason is going to be the quarterback position. Who will be their quarterback next year? I don't know, guys. I have no idea. Could it be a free agent? Could it be a rookie? It could. It could be either one, and I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever. Now, looking at the Pittsburgh Steelers and their needs, obviously quarterback, as I mentioned. Wide receiver is pretty good. You know, it would be nice to have the trio of Juju, Claypool, and Deontay Johnson, but honestly, just having Claypool and Deontay Johnson is good enough for me. James Washington's also a free agent, as well as Ray McLeod. Not a big deal. I feel like with how good the Steelers are at drafting wide receivers, they're going to draft one. I don't know when, but they'll draft one this year, probably in the 3rd or 4th round. Now, looking at the offensive line, this is the real big area of need outside of quarterback. They need a tackle. They need guards. They need centers. They need all of it. They really, when you look at their starting offensive line, they have almost zero answers. Honestly, the best player from last year might have been a guy that's a free agent. So you look at Okafor, I believe is how you pronounce his name. He was pretty good for them last year, but he is a free agent. So trying to retain him would be, I think, huge. Trey Turner, you could let him go if you want. I mean, you could bring him back. That was a weird sound, but you get the point. Yeah, looking at the offensive line, the Steelers could use a lot of talent. So you could definitely go young. Guard position. James Daniels is young, good player. I don't think they're going to be in the mix for Brandon Scherf, Lincoln Tomlinson, because they're a little bit older, probably a little bit pricey for them. I think Alex Kappa is somebody that would fit the Steelers. He feels like a Steeler. He plays with a hard-nosed, physical style, power guard from the Bucks. That would be an undervalued player to target. Mark Glowinski, same sort of thing. Ted Karras, same sort of thing. These guys make sense to me for the Steelers. You want to bring that physicality element. I feel like they're missing just the ability to move people up front, especially in the run game, that I think would be huge. So guys like, if you could get even Alex Kappa and Ted Karras, that would be unbelievable. And that would be a huge upgrade. You could also go young, like I said. Center position, I'm not sure if they'll be in on Ryan Jensen, but he's obviously the top guy. Ben Jones would also fit for me. Bradley Bozeman would fit. Maybe Ethan Pocic. I don't really see Brian Allen being a great fit for them. I think he's more of a fit for the teams like the Dolphins and stuff like that. So center, I think, is going to go from the draft, but I think guard could definitely be handled in free agency. And tackle also could be handled in free agency potentially. Do the Steelers try to get in on a bigger name tackle this offseason? Now, given their salary cap space, I'm not sure if they can. But maybe. We'll see. So offensive line is their top priority outside of obviously quarterback. And then you look at the defense. Their defensive line is probably still fine for now. You know, it's getting a little bit older, but Cameron Hayward is playing at the peak of his powers, and Chris Wormley's okay, and you've still got Tuitt, I believe, is still there. He's been hurt a lot, but I believe he's still under contract. So those guys are all fine for you. Edge position, obviously, you've got TJ Watt, the ultimate difference maker. Alex Highsmith, I like. I think those are your two starters going into next year, and you're just adding depth from there. Linebacker, I know that a lot of Steeler fans are complaining about Devin Bush's play, but you've already spent a lot of capital in Devin Bush and Joe Schobert. So spending a lot of money on linebacker, I think, would be nonsensical. I don't think it makes sense. So the front seven, I think, is honestly fairly solid. I think what's important for them is adding a little bit of depth behind TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith, because we've seen such a massive dip when TJ Watt leaves the lineup that I think getting in just a steady, like, outside linebacker that can set the edge and stop the run. Maybe you bring in like a Dante Hightower from the Patriots or a Jawan Bentley. These are inside linebackers, but they could play a little bit of outside, but guys that are good against the run and can go downhill and fit that Steelers scheme would make some sense to me, because Devin Bush certainly needs to be hid in the run game because he's been really bad. In the secondary, I think they should do their best to re-sign Ahkello Witherspoon. They could re-sign Terrell Edmunds if they like, but I don't think they need to. Obviously, they've got Minkah Fitzpatrick, who's good. Sutton, I think, solid. Norwood was pleasant surprise, I guess you could say. Justin Lane, like, these guys aren't really well known, but they're not terrible. Joe Hayden could be back. They could target like a Stephon Gilmore, who I think would be a great fit for them, especially at this stage in his career. They could target a Carlton Davis, these type of corners that are very smart and good in zone, but also can play man. They could look maybe for the veterans as well. A Levi Wallace type feels like a Steeler signing to me over the years, but I'd try to bring back Ahkello Witherspoon if you could, and that would shore up one of the sides of your corner position. Then maybe try to upgrade the other side, but I think some depth on defense, and I think the number one priority for the Steelers this offseason should be the offensive line. Look for the quarterback later on. Maybe they go after Jameis Winston. I think that would be a nice fit for them. I'm not buying Jimmy Garoppolo to the Steelers. I don't think that makes sense, just given their scheme. I don't know. I don't know about that one. But Winston and maybe Wentz, if you want a short-term solution. Bring on my guy Gardner Minshew, bro. I'm telling you, the bargain quarterback of 2022. If I was the GM, I would trade for him. But yeah, I think they're probably going to draft a quarterback. So I think the number one priority for their team is to redo the offensive line with the money that they have, and then draft a young quarterback, get that new offensive line with that receiving core. You've got Harris to rely on. Also, bringing in a backup running back wouldn't be a bad idea either. That can complement Najee Harris and take a little bit of a load off of him, because he is simply on the field way too much. So that's the Pittsburgh Steelers. Offensive line, young quarterback. If you want to go for a vet, I would go for like a guy like Winston. They'll probably draft a receiver, because why not? They're so good at it. Secondary, bring back Witherspoon. Maybe look to get a Gilmore type. Up front, I think you're fine. You just got to add depth. Jake says, Mitch is taking this so seriously, it's like he's speaking to the GMs and the teams. I love it. That's the whole point, bro. That's the whole point, but I appreciate it. Thank you for watching, and thank you for loving it. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. All right. The Baltimore Ravens. We got to talk about the Ravens, who I feel like are a serious underrated team entering next season, because I think a lot of people just generally underrate Lamar Jackson. And then on top of that, they've got potentially a good team next year. They've got a strong coaching staff. They've got a lot of players returning from injury. So all of those things have to be considered if you're the Baltimore Ravens. But looking at the Baltimore Ravens, I think you finally have a receiving core that is respectable, starting with Rashad Bateman and Marquise Brown, and then obviously Mark Andrews at tight end. You don't have to do much there. Maybe you bring in Antonio Brown, or you bring in somebody like a veteran that can be a number 3, maybe an upgrade over Sammy Watkins, who I didn't think played very well. My personal target for you would be Jamison Crowder. I think somebody in the slot that's reliable, that can get open. I still think Jamison Crowder can play. And mostly Bateman and Brown are on the outside on the perimeter. So putting Crowder in the slot would be that type of target. I don't think you've got to spend major money at this position either. So yeah, somebody like Crowder, low end, veteran, can play, reliable, and wants to play on a good team. That makes sense. The offensive line, Ronnie Stanley, stud, back. That's huge. Tyree Phillips is good. He's back. Then you've got Kevin Zeitler. He's very good, and I thought rejuvenated himself. He is back as well. Villanueva's under contract. I think he's going to be cut. I think he's under contract. I think he's going to be cut. I think they're going to get rid of him. He was terrible for them last year. People told me he was terrible, and, they were right, so I'll give him credit for that. Center position, you want Bradley Bozeman back. If you don't, you're wrong. But you want Bradley Bozeman back. If you can't get him, maybe you look towards Ryan Jensen, who I believe played for the Ravens at one point. Or you look at Ben Jones, or maybe you look at Ted Karras, who's played guard and center. But all of those guys are kind of like power run players. Then you look at right tackle. Honestly, they might want to spend some money on right tackle. Like Trent Brown. I mean, Trent Brown, I know Orlando Brown's not going to be the pick, but Trent Brown would be a certified stud on the Baltimore Ravens. Like that guy on the right side, with Stanley on the left side, opening up the run game for Lamar Jackson and J.K. Dobbins, like look out. So Orlando Brown would be great with them. Ryan Jensen would also be great. So right tackle, I think they might spend some big money on, or they could look maybe to the draft, but either way, they've got to upgrade the right tackle's position. That's probably their biggest need on offense. Everything else is good. Patrick Ricard, the fullback, they'll probably bring back as well, but that's not going to break the bank. Defensively, also their running backs are back, so they don't need to really look towards running backs because I don't think you're going to lose your top 2 running backs again. And then also you've kind of found out that you've got a couple other guys that can play in need be. But if they lose both running backs, they're going to probably pick up another like Latavius Murray type next year if that happens. Defensively, this is where a lot of players could leave. Brandon Williams, Calais Campbell, older interior defensive lineman. Justin Houston is a free agent. LJ Fort at linebacker. Justin Ellis, Pernell McPhee. The Ravens do a very good job at signing veterans in the front 7 to 1-year contracts. They've done this for many years, and they usually fit the scheme very well, and every single time they sign somebody, I'm like, yeah, that totally is the Baltimore Ravens, and it makes sense, and I know the guy's going to be good. Every single year, they sign Pernell McPhee, and every single year he plays well for them. So that's kind of the way it goes. I think they've needed a linebacker upgrade for a while, but I don't think they really value that position. I think somebody like, and this is the thing, I think they're changing their scheme. So I'm not quite sure how much their scheme is going to change from Don Martindale, but maybe they go a little bit more 4-man rush speed up front. So that would completely change what they do. And that would completely change the context for what type of players you're getting. But you've got Away, who's a first-round pick and pretty good. You've got, I think, Tyus Bowser is one of the most underrated edge players in the NFL. You got those 2 guys on the edge. Jalen Ferguson's okay. He's still there. So you've got a decent edge rotation. It would be nice to have another stud, but that might just take too much money, and they're not in a great position. I think they'd like to have Calais Campbell back, but maybe with their shift defensively, it might shift the type of personnel that they have in the interior as well. So I can't really answer that necessarily, unless you guys know. But getting Marcus Peters back is going to be huge. I think they want to re-sign Anthony Everett. who is going to go somewhere if he doesn't get signed here. He's going to get a decent contract because I think he was pretty good for them. Jimmy Smith's also a free agent, and Deshaun Elliott's a free agent. So I think they could look towards a safety. They could use an upgrade there, somebody that can be a difference maker on the back end. Tyrann Mathieu, Marcus May. Who else? Marcus May, Tyrann Mathieu. Maybe they go for Devin McCourty. I wouldn't be surprised by that. So it's more so a free safety, right, that they need. Like a more of a coverage safety. Maybe like Anthony Harris, I don't know. But somebody that can play, a plethora of coverages. Justin Reed would be a pretty good one, actually. Or maybe they just bring back Elliott, but you could see an upgrade there. But their corner position is going to be immensely better with all their players back and healthy. And they're very good at finding depth at that position throughout the draft, undrafted guys, that sort of thing. They're kind of like New England that way. But I'd like to see them get faster at linebacker. I'd like to see them get a right tackle. I'd like to see them get a third receiver upgrade. Retain Bradley Bozeman. Get a safety. That's a difference maker. And then maybe draft some D lineman edge players. I don't think you're going to be able to afford some of the guys that are on the open market. When you look at edge and stuff like that, you could look at like Chandler Jones. You could look at Ogba. You could look at Reddick, Landry. I just think they're going to be too much money. Now, maybe a guy like Chandler Jones on like a 1-year contract, something like that, might work, but I'm not exactly 100% sure, especially given that there's going to be, maybe a scheme change there. And do they value that safety position the way that they used to when they had Ed Reed and stuff? Because it's been a number of years, since they lost Earl Thomas, they haven't really spent big money on safety. They've kind of gotten away with spending lesser money on it. So maybe they continue to take that strategy with the safety position and kind of spending less on it. We'll see. So Baltimore's tricky, but I think mostly shoring up that offensive line for Lamar Jackson, adding a complimentary receiver, and making sure that back end of your defense is still one of the strongest in football would be the things that I do.